Good morning. I want to welcome everyone here to the Lakes Area Low Carb Conference. I'm going to set my bullet coffee down here. That's something I'm sure you're going to hear about today is bullet coffee. I'm guessing from one of our speakers. Great low carb coffee. I want to welcome you here. We're excited. We have a huge turnout. This is our first year. We have almost 170 people here today. So that's amazing. So great job getting the word out. I want to thank all of the doctors. This couldn't have happened without tons of people helping put this together. I'm Pastor Zach. I'm one of the pastors here at Pequot Lakes Baptist Church. So on behalf of the church, I'd like to welcome you as well. So we have a couple of announcements before we get started. We're a little bit behind, so I'm going to rush through these. So if I talk too fast, well, ask your neighbor. Maybe they'll be able to fill you in. Here's our schedule for today. First off, we're well beyond this, but that's okay. I'm going to have a talk here in a moment, and then Dr. Park is going to come out, and he's going to tell us about why we get fat. All right? I'm looking forward to that talk. After that, we're going to have a coffee break. It was going to be 10 minutes. We're probably going to push that back to 5, so jump out there, grab your coffee, get back right away, use the bathroom if you need to. They're straight back there. Coffee's there. After that, then we're going to have Dr. Berger give us a talk on eating low carb in a high carb world. And after that, we're going to have a break. He's going to come back, tell us about low carb imaging, which is something he does a lot for his profession. That one's going to be a fascinating talk. I think you're going to enjoy it. Then we're going to do lunch, and it's catered by Prairie Bay. So the food menu looks awesome. They sent it to me yesterday. I'm excited to eat. And then we're going to end with a Q&A, and that'll be down in the gym. So if you follow this hallway down, take a right, go straight, you'll be there. All right? Now, that's all of our announcements. So I'm up for a talk here. So this morning, before we hear about the importance of health and nutrition, I want to take a brief moment to tell you first about the unimportance of health and nutrition. All right? Now wait a second. Why on earth would you do that? That's a good question. I'm glad you asked it, so I'll explain why. The reason I want to do that is because ultimately health can't save you. All right? It cannot save you. To put it bluntly, all right, we're going to get bluntly here. It's a little depressive statement here, and then we're going to get positive. You cannot avoid your obituary column. No matter what you learn today, you can't do it. All right? We can make our lives better. We can make our lives healthier. We can feel better. But ultimately, that column's coming. It's inevitable. All right, that's even bleak for me. So let's move on. No matter if you eat a high-carb diet, a low-carb diet, a ketogenic diet, or a paleo diet, in the end, the result's the same. So ultimately, that's why I really don't put much stock in faith healers. Because unless you're a 300-year-old faith healer, I'm not buying what you're selling, all right? If you're 300 years old, let's talk, because you're onto something there, okay? Now, don't get me wrong. I love nutrition. It's one of 3 topics that I know just a little bit about, because it's one of only 3 topics that I actually read about. All right? I'm a theology/philosophy nerd. I love that. I love computer technology, any form of technology. It's my jam. All right? I just love it. I can tinker with stuff till 2 in the morning on that, and it's just totally pointless and a waste of my time, but I love it. Also, I'm the guy at your family dinner who's sitting there judging you for eating pie. All right? Although I'm secretly wishing I was eating it with you. All right? But as you're eating the pie, I'm sitting there judging, and I'm looking for any opportunity to tell you about the recent book that I read on low carbs or nutrition or anything like that. All right? Now, I really do try to not be that guy, all right? Because as we all know, that guy's the absolute worst, right? That person's annoying, all right? So if you're that guy on behalf of humanity, let me just tell you, stop it. Nobody likes you, all right? Let people eat their pie on Thanksgiving and leave them alone, all right? Because even though people might act interested, all right, in what you're telling them, you know what's more interesting than all the insight on the latest book you read on nutrition? Pizza, right? Pizza is way more interesting, especially if it's Rafferty's pizza, okay? If I have Rafferty's pizza in front of me, that's that's the worst scenario where you want to start selling me on the merits of not eating that, okay? There should be an amen in there. But let's move on. Now, with that said, I am a huge advocate of low-carb living, all right? Personally, I live by the low-carb approach, okay? Most of the time, I should say. And it absolutely makes me feel better, it makes me think clearer, and work better. I'm convinced. That's why I wanted to put a low-carb conference on with these amazing doctors we have with us here this morning. I'm convinced it genuinely helps people live life better, feel better, okay? And we're going to hear about that today. But still, I'll say it again. health and nutrition can't ultimately save us. All right? So if it can't save us, the next question, I guess, is why is a church spending its time on low carb and nutrition? Why are we focusing on health and nutrition? Isn't that sort of like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic as it's going down sinking? It's like, oh, we better get these things in order quickly. Why? We're sinking, Shouldn't, as a church, we just be spending our time out there preaching the Bible, telling about Jesus? Okay. Please allow me to briefly explain to you why, as a church, we care about the health of our community. In Matthew chapter 22, the religious leaders, who were total jerks, by the way, they came to Jesus trying to stump him. They wanted to show him up. All right? Now, there was two groups of these religious leaders. You had the Sadducees, you had the Pharisees. Most of us have probably heard of the Pharisees. They were jerks. They're legalists. They thought they were better than everybody. So the first group, the Sadducees, they come to Jesus, and then Jesus just absolutely destroys them intellectually. And the Pharisees are like, yeah, we don't like them. Good job. All right? But then the Pharisees, they turn to Jesus. They're like, all right, it's our turn. They're like, riddle me this, Jesus. Of all the 613 laws in the Bible's Old Testament, tell us, which one's the greatest? All right? So here's what Jesus says to him. He says, oh, I lost my spot. There we go. Sorry. He says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. So at this point, the Pharisees, who spent their existence basically trying to obey God's laws, like they followed the laws, and then they set up other laws to prevent them from breaking those laws. And then they're like, you know what, that's not good enough. We still could maybe break a law. Let's set up another law over here to prevent us from breaking the law we set up to prevent us from breaking this law. That's how hardcore these people were. All right? So they're like, cool, we love God. We spend all of our lives trying to love God. But Jesus doesn't stop there, and this is what's cool. He goes on, he's like, oh yeah, I'm going to tell you the second greatest commandment too. And he says, and the second greatest commandment is like the first. Love your neighbor as yourself. For all of the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. He says everything, all 613 of these laws, they boil down to these two things. Love God with all your heart, love your neighbor as yourself. Okay? And at that point, they're like, okay, Jesus, who's my neighbor? Define who my neighbor is, right? Because these people had a lot of ethnic groups they really didn't like, a lot of different areas, like geographical areas around them, people groups within them that they were like, we don't like the Romans, we don't like a lot of people they really did not like. They hated them. So Jesus responds with the classic story of the parable of the Good Samaritan. And the basic takeaway was, you see the person over there who's your worst enemy? If you really love God, you're going to love them. And they're like, they're all grumpy about it. They didn't like that because they didn't like the Samaritans. And that's what's interesting, is the God of the Bible, he doesn't simply tell us to love people who are easy to love, does he? No, he actually commands us to love our enemies and pray for those who persecute us. Why? And the reason is so that we may be children of our Father in heaven. Okay? So now let me tell you, if you think it's easy to love jerks, you've never tried it before. Okay? I'm a jerk, and I know how hard it must be for people to try to love me, all right? It's not easy. Loving unlovable people is hard work. In fact, it requires a miraculous change within our hearts to make it possible to even do that, all right? That means that we can't do it on our own. I can't just get really fired up and be like, all right, you know what? I'm going to go love people who aren't lovable because you know what? I don't feel like doing that. My heart doesn't naturally want to do that on its own. However, one of the surest signs of finding a true Christian church, is that you find people within it that are loving, unlovable people. And here's two reasons for why that's the case. Have you ever heard the expression that God is love? Well, in 1 John 4:8, here's what it says. It says, whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. See, God himself is the source of all goodness, and he's also the standard of love. He's the standard of love and the source of love. And as Christians, we believe, as a church, that through Jesus Christ, we can not only have a relationship with this God of the universe, but he actually comes to dwell inside of me. And if the God of the universe comes to dwell inside of me, the infinite God of the universe, in finite Zach Broom, wouldn't you think there's going to be some outpouring of that love towards others in the same way that God loved me, who was unlovable? Yeah, that's how that works. Second reason for why Christians love others, including unlovable people, is because of what Romans 5:8 tells us. And this is what it says. It says, but God showed his great love for us by sending Jesus Christ to die for us while we were still sinners. And 2 verses later, it actually goes even further. It says, while we were still enemies with God. That's what Jesus did for us. As the Bible tells us, Christ died for us so that we might be the children of God, so that our hearts may be able to properly love again, as they were meant to all along. Now, I don't have much time to go into this morning. This talk is kind of a mini teaser, part 1, for the sermon I'm preaching tomorrow for Sunday morning church. And the Bible is absolutely crystal clear on this. So I'll just say this. Unlike what every other worldview out there tells you, unlike what every other religion out there tells you, you can't fix your broken heart problem. You can't fix your broken relationship with God through moral performance. All right? You can't do it. It's not possible. The Bible is crystal clear on this. So then, the question is, how do we fix our broken hearts? How do we fix our broken relationships with God? Well, the short answer is you can't. But here's what Ephesians says. It says, for by grace you have been saved through faith. This is not of yourselves. That's not moral, it's not moral improvement system, all right? He's saying it's the gift of God is what he finishes with. It's a gift, and we accept it by faith. The classic John 3:16 says it clearly, for God so loved the world, he gave his one and only Son, that whosoever believes in him will not perish but have eternal life. All right? And so as a church, we care about nutrition because we care about people, because God cares about people. He does. He cares about everybody in this room. All right? And because we care about people, that's why we want to do a nutrition conference. And we want to put this together not so I can get up here and preach at you, all right? Not because we want your money, all right, but because God cares about people and he calls us to do the same. And because I have, as a church, as Christians, we've come to personally know God. We want other people to know God too, okay? If I find the source of true happiness, all right, contentment, and I keep that to myself, that's as bad as the person who finds the cure for cancer and is like, nah, I'm good. Got it for me and my family. You guys don't need it. All right? So no. We want you to have a relationship with the God of love because that's the only connection, or that's the only way possible to have true love. I've heard it said before that true Christianity is one beggar showing another where he found food, and I'm pretty sure that's right. All right? The appetite and the longing of our hearts can only be satisfied in Jesus Christ. For he is the only one who can truly and ultimately save us. Now, with that said, we are absolutely delighted that you are here with us this morning. All right? I'm excited for the talks we're going to have. We have some really great speakers. We got a Q&A session going on at the end with the doctors, and you should have gotten a piece of paper for that as you came in. So if you think of questions about nutrition, make sure you write those down. We're going to have that. But before we begin and ask our first speaker to come, if it's okay with you, I'm going to open us with prayer and just ask God to bless the day, that we have a good time together, that the talks are clear, that we understand this, and that ultimately that we can walk away from this conference and find ways to live better and feel better. All right? So let's pray and begin with that. Father God, we just come before you today. We just thank you for just this facility here. We can come and meet. We thank you for the doctors who have put so much time and effort and everyone who is involved with this event. Father, we ask that you bless the day, bless the talks. Pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Dave?
I, too, would like to welcome you all. And first of all, just let me tell you a little bit about me. I'm a family physician practicing in Longville, Minnesota right now. My interest in nutrition began about 8 to 10 years ago when a very well-meaning 82-year-old lady told me I was getting a little chubby. And it kind of started me thinking, what can I do? And at about that time, we started to see this epidemic in our world of diabetes, prediabetes, blood pressure problems, heart disease, obesity. And about that time, my son Nathan gave me a book. He said, Dad, you should read this book. And I was open to anything at that time. And so I read this book called The Primal Blueprint by Mark Sisson. And he described a fairly radical approach to nutrition, emphasizing using a lower carbohydrate approach to weight loss and to managing your these medical conditions. And so I said, what do I have to lose? I gave it a try. About 3 months later, I was down 30 pounds. My triglycerides dropped. My HDL, which is the good cholesterol, doubled. And I said, this is a pretty good deal, I think. And I think it's something I should maybe get into. And Dr. Fisker and I then kind of started talking between ourselves, and both of us kind of adapted this method of counseling our patients. and we've had some very good results with it. So, when they said, let's have a low-carb conference, it's kind of scary to think, how do you go about doing that? I said, okay, we'll do it. This is a good idea. And then you ask yourself, this must be catching on. You think we had the longest, coldest winter we've had in how many years? And, on a nice day, one of the first nice days, we have 200 people sitting inside listening about how to eat low carb. And so there must be some interest out there. And I'm just glad you came. And hopefully you'll learn something and you will enjoy the day. One thing I want to say before we have our next speaker come up is don't change any of your medicines. Don't do anything without talking to your doctor about what we're going to be talking about today. Some of you guys will be tempted to say, I'm just going to throw that insulin away. I don't need it anymore. But don't do that. Talk to your doctor. So with that, I'm going to introduce our first speaker. Steve Park is a graduate of the Duluth Family Practice Residency Program. He is employed by Essentia Health as a family physician and emergency medicine physician since 1981. Since 2003, his practice has focused on obesity medicine via Essentia Telehealth. Telehealth. Something you got to look into. I mean, he just told me that he's been down to the Bahamas all winter seeing patients on the telehealth. I got to figure out how to do that, Steve. He's a diplomat of the American Board of Obesity Medicine and a member of the Obesity Medicine Association and the Obesity Society. Give a warm welcome to Dr. Steve Park.
Well, everybody can hear me, I hope. This is really important, and it's a real privilege to be here. It's an honor to be here. The stuff I'm going to talk about, I think, is really, really important because we got a mess on our hands with our nutrition. I'm going to talk about why we get fat, why we gain weight, why we struggle with losing weight. So, I'm an old family doc. I'm an ER doc. Went to the dark side in the mid-'90s, and then that gave me some extra time, so I was able to study about nutrition. It's always been important to me, and learn about exercise physiology and how that all fits in. And so, since the early 2000s, I've been doing pretty much exclusively weight management. And now I provide services to about 24 different communities scattered around North Dakota, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. Through telehealth. Oh, I can see it up there. Good. Going backwards. So I got to turn around. I can't see that very well. We want to talk about the physiology of adiposopathy, why we get fat, and how that sick fat tissue affects us. I want you to understand the endocrine aspects of this because it's an endocrine disease. It's a hormonal disease. And it is a disease, okay? And understand how the macronutrients, protein, fat, and carbohydrates play a role in all of this. And how all of this affects weight loss success or failure, and the treatment strategies that we can use we'll probably not get into because we're not going to have enough time for that. So energy storage is absolutely necessary for our survival. How do we get through the famine if we can't store calories as fat to sustain us through that period of time? But gluttony and sloth is what we have been taught is the problem. Traditional thinking is that the problem with gaining weight is that we just eat too much and we don't exercise. That doesn't explain the 6-month-old, the 9-month-old babies that are obese. They certainly haven't got that problem, and yet they are obese, and we've got an epidemic. Our diet, since the early 80s, the global industrial diet is cheap. It's quick and easy. I can't tell you how many times I hear patients tell me they want something quick and easy. Tastes good, lasts forever. We did an experiment at the Duluth Clinic where we took a McDonald's hamburger and left it unrefrigerated for a year and came back to it. Guess what? It looked the same, and the fries looked the same. It lasts forever. And again, this is not about calories. I want you to understand we're going to learn about calories. Traditional thinking is that it's all about calories, and it's not. We eat too fast. We don't cook. Everybody wants something quick and easy. No one takes the time to eat. All of our food is processed. It's packaged. It's full of sugar. And we've taken exercise out of our lives. I mean, if you go to Target, everybody drives around till they find the parking space that's close. You get out of the car, you walk to the door, and it opens for you. So we've energized. We basically have taken exercise out of our lives. This is a slide that shows diabetes, the increase in diabetes and insulin resistance, which is basically the crux of what we're going to talk about this morning is insulin resistance. So it started in the U.S. back in it started going up in the late 70s, and there's reasons for that, and Dr. Berger is going to talk about that. But all of the other countries are following right behind us. Everybody assumed that it was a problem just in the U.S., and it's not. It's a worldwide problem. You want to know where it's increasing the fastest? Is in the Middle Eastern countries. Because they don't drink alcohol, but they love Coke. And they drink sugared beverages like there's no tomorrow. So the trend is upward, and it's continued to go upwards. There's reasons for that. New cases of diabetes are expanding exponentially. If we look at our population in the U.S., the adult population, 2/3, 70% are insulin resistant. Half of those are diabetic, and it's affecting our youth just as much as it is the adults because of the sugar content in our diet. So what happened was 40 years ago, they came out with the food pyramid, and they told us that fat was bad. If you eat bacon and eggs, you're going to die from heart disease. And that was based on some kind of crappy research that I think Dr. Berger is going to talk about a little bit. But the bottom line is they took the fat out of our food. What makes food taste good? Why do you put bacon on a cheeseburger? It makes it taste good. Okay? Well, they took that away from us. And nobody could replace the food in their diet with protein because it cost too much, so they replaced it with carbohydrate. What makes carb taste good? You got to add sugar to it. And that's what's happened. All of these packaged foods combine the combination of sugar with bad fat, and that is what causes heart disease. And if you want to know what that looks like when you put it on a plate, it's called a Hostess Twinkie or a donut. So what's happened is that our calorie consumption has gone up, but the reasons for that are hormonal, and we'll talk about that. The other aspect of it that I want to spend a little bit of time on is the epigenetic transmission of all of this, and we'll get to that. So it was an experiment that went wrong, and we've got an epidemic of obesity, diabetes. We've got an epidemic of prediabetes. We've got childhood obesity, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, polycystic ovary disease. We got all of these different things. Coronary artery disease is still rampant. If you drive to Fargo and walk in their coronary care unit, it's full. So this whole concept of taking fat out of our food didn't work. And it's expensive. It's costing our healthcare system huge dollars. I talk about the fact that everybody my age is worried about whether or not Social Security is going to be there to provide for us. Social Security is going to be there. These people are all dying young. Medicare is going to go broke. So break obesity down into two different facets. There's adiposopathy, which is sick fat. This belly fat that everybody worries about, makes your pants tight, jiggles when you walk, is the biggest endocrine organ in the body. And that's what's driving the disease, and it's related to insulin, which we'll get to. The other part of obesity is the gravitational forces that weight puts on you. The joint problems, the early breakdown of your knees, your hips, your ankles, the bad backs that people have, sleep apnea, where all of this belly fat's pushing up on your diaphragm and you can't breathe right. That's one aspect of obesity. But what really is causing it is the sick fat, which is called metabolic syndrome, insulin resistance syndrome. And there are 5 criteria: elevated blood sugar of some kind, increased waist circumference, low levels of HDL cholesterol, high levels of triglyceride, and generally hypertension. You only need 3 to qualify, and 2/3 of our population has it. So, metabolic syndrome, heart disease, lipid problems, high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, dementia. Alzheimer's disease is going crazy in our country. They're now calling it type 3 diabetes because it's related to insulin resistance in the brain. So cancer, polycystic ovary disease, and then non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, all of these things are, this is the nuts and, this is the bread and butter that we make our living on in primary care, and it's all driven by insulin resistance. And if we get rid of the insulin resistance and treat that, then we've made some progress. So we've been pretty good at treating these diseases and the sequelae of metabolic syndrome, but it's in all of these different comorbidities, but we got to treat insulin resistance to get rid of them. You know, my patients don't die from obesity. They don't die because they're heavy. They die from the metabolic consequences that's going on. They die from the heart disease, the chronic high blood pressure. They die from the lipid issues. They die from increased risks of cancer that they have. So that's the issue. And as I said, it's worldwide. So insulin is a hormone that's created by the beta cells and the pancreatic islets of the pancreas. Insulin is the storage hormone. That's its job. It takes calories that you eat and it shoves them into fat storage. Insulin specifically blocks an enzyme called hormone-sensitive lipase that allows that fat that's been stored in your fat cells from coming back and being utilized. So it converts our food into a one-way street into fat storage. And I hear that from patients every day. They talk about how their weight ratchets up slowly and they can't get rid of it. Hear it every day. Elevated insulin levels are sort of the trunk of the tree, and it starts in the liver with fat deposition in the liver. Insulin resistance, as it gets worse, evolves into diabetes. Diabetes isn't the disease, it's insulin resistance. And that's what drives all of these other diseases. The low HDL, the high blood sugar, the triglyceride elevation, chronic inflammation, which we'll talk about here in a minute. So insulin resistance is carbohydrate intolerance. When you become diabetic, you're carbohydrate toxic. And you can't, everybody's a little bit different. We all know that individual that can eat anything that they want, and God bless them, they are particularly insulin sensitive. They can eat carbs and get away with it. Most of us can't. Most of us have varying degrees of insulin resistance, and so some of us struggle with it more than others. My genetics are terrible. I had 7 brothers and sisters, and they're all big people. My parents were both big people, and half of them were diabetic. And so I started learning about this back a long, long time ago, and I'm the only one that came out of it so far intact here. What happens when you eat a carbohydrate? This is a time response curve with insulin. When you eat a carbohydrate, within 2 minutes, your blood sugar goes up. That rise in blood sugar triggers insulin to be secreted from your pancreas. When you are insulin resistant, you secrete a ton of it, which then takes everything you're eating and shoves it into fat storage and blocks fat breakdown so you can't lose it. When you eat protein, when you eat meat, fish, eggs, that will make your blood sugar go up also, but it doesn't go up as fast, it doesn't go up high. Still requires some insulin, but much less. But look what happens when you eat fat. Nothing. There's no rise in insulin. There's no insulin response. There's no rise in blood sugar. And you're able to burn those calories. So this is all about a low carbohydrate, high fat diet. Remember, that's the problem. They took the fat out of our food. We give diabetics glucose tolerance tests. A glucose tolerance test is about the same amount of sugar as you get when you go to IHOP and you eat 2 pancakes with bacon or with syrup. Okay? It's about 200 grams of carb that they give you. And this is what happens. Blood sugar goes up, insulin goes up. A fat tolerance test, what happens to your blood sugar? Nothing. What happens to insulin? Nothing. There's no rise in insulin. So we eat carbs, it raises blood sugar, which raises insulin, which makes everything gets stored as fat, and it makes you hungry, which we'll talk about the hormone aspects of it here in just a minute. This is sugar. Right-hand side is fructose, left-hand side is glucose. That's what sucrose, that's what sugar is. I don't care if it's white sugar, brown sugar, maple sugar, molasses, honey, agave nectar, it's all the same stuff. So you got a molecule of glucose, you got a molecule of fructose, and they're bonded. When you consume them, that bond is broken. The glucose goes into your bloodstream where it raises your blood sugar, which raises insulin, which makes you store everything as fat and blocks fat breakdown. The fructose is a different story. The fructose goes into your bloodstream where it's metabolized only by the liver. Almost the same as alcohol, which drives the fatty liver disease, pre-cirrhosis, and ultimately can evolve into cirrhosis. Cirrhosis is the third leading cause of liver transplant now is non-alcoholic fatty liver disease leading into cirrhosis. So this picture is wrong way. This is starch. Starch, back up, is glucose. It's glucose bonded to glucose, bonded to glucose, bonded to glucose. It's a polymer of glucose, so it's a bunch of different glucose molecules bonded together. Might be 100 of them, might be 1,000 of them. Well, when you eat starch, you've got an enzyme in your saliva called amylase, and when you chew a potato, starch, by the time it hits your stomach, those bonds have been broken and you're mainlining glucose, which raises your blood glucose, blood sugar, which raises your insulin, which takes everything and shoves it into fat storage. Fructose, on the other hand, as I said, is a dose-dependent hepatotoxin. It's metabolized just like alcohol in the liver. It drives insulin resistance. The fat deposition spills over into the pancreas, which ultimately is what causes the diabetes and worsens the insulin resistance. So your fat tissue is metabolically active. It's the biggest endocrine organ in the body. It makes hormones. Everybody thinks that fat tissue just jiggles when you walk and makes your pants tight, and it's much, much, much more complicated than that. It secretes hormones. Leptin, which is sort of the governor on your appetite, but it turns out that leptin, if you're insulin resistant, you're leptin resistant. And so your appetite controls aren't where they should be. It secretes a hormone called adiponectin, which is a great hormone. Adiponectin is cardioprotective. The less fat tissue you have, the skinnier you are, the more adiponectin you make, and it protects you from heart disease. When you have lots of fat tissue, you don't make nearly as much adiponectin. And then there's the inflammatory cytokines, and there's a dozen of them that are secreted by the fat tissue that cause disease, and they are activated by insulin. So you got these fancy names on these hormones that come out of your belly fat that cause the diseases that we have to treat every day in the office. This is why patients with weight issues have a higher risk of malignancy, they have higher risks of arthritis, they have higher risks of asthma. What's asthma? It's inflammation of the airways. Migraine headaches. What's migraine headaches? Inflammation of the blood vessels in your brain. So these are all inflammatory diseases. You know, fibromyositis and all of the different inflammatory diseases are related to these inflammatory cytokines that are activated by insulin. Well, guess what? We get rid of the carbs, we get rid of the insulin, you get rid of the insulin, you get rid of the inflammation, you feel better. So, fat tissue makes hormones, leptin, adiponectin, the inflammatory cytokines. Your GI tract secretes gut hormones. All of these, ghrelin, glucagon, CCK, the GLP-1, PYY, excipitamodulin, and pancreatic polypeptidase, all of those, they curtail your appetite. They make you feel full, so you're not hungry, except ghrelin, the first one. Ghrelin's the hormone that kicks in and makes your stomach growl and tells you that you're hungry. All the rest of these shut you off and they say you're full, but insulin shuts them down. These hormones work on the brain in the arcuate nucleus in your hypothalamus, where they govern eating behavior. So this is a hormonal disease that causes all of this. It is not gluttony and sloth. It's a hormone disease. So we've got these fancy neuropeptides, NPY, agouti-related protein orexin, that stimulate appetite and make you want to eat more, and they're activated by insulin. And then you've got the others, MCH, POMC, CART, alpha-melanocyte stimulating hormone, which curtail appetite. Leptin's the governor on appetite, but when you're insulin resistant, you're oftentimes leptin resistant, particularly in kids. It's produced in the fat cells. Leptin resistance is we've got some medications that we use to help treat that, but it's not working right. So the governor on your appetite's not working. Adiponectin we talked about. These are the gut hormones. And then these are the neuropeptides. And the top 4 of those will stimulate appetite. The bottom 3 will curtail appetite. But look at the name. Cocaine and amphetamine regulating transcript. I mean, it's an addiction, and it's related to hormones. Dopamine, serotonin are 2 neurotransmitters. Dopamine is the most addictive substance in the world. Dopamine conveys pleasure. Well, it turns out that when you're insulin resistant, it takes more stimulation. You've got to eat more to satisfy that dopamine secretion. It takes more food to kick the dopamine in. Serotonin is what we want. Serotonin conveys satisfaction. That means that you've had enough, and so we want lots of that. And there's some things that we do sometimes with patients with medications and with nutrition to help increase the serotonin levels. And all of this process is taking place in the hypothalamus, in the middle of your brain, where there's reward centers and insulin affects them and drives the appetite. So insulin drives energy metabolism. It's driven by carbs and to a lesser degree by protein, and it's not stimulated by fat. So this is all about a low-carb, high-fat, not low-carb, high-protein approach. And once again, insulin response. Carbs, protein, fat doesn't stimulate insulin. So insulin stimulates fat storage. It promotes de novo lipogenesis, which just means gaining weight, storing calories as fat. And it inhibits fat breakdown. So again, it converts your food into a one-way street into fat storage. I'm going to skip that slide. It just shows that fat breakdown has to occur in low levels of insulin. Fat storage occurs with high levels of insulin. What happens when you eat a carbohydrate? What happens when you eat a carbohydrate? It can go 3 or 4 places. When you eat any carb, it can be stored as glycogen in your muscle. It can be stored as glycogen in your liver tissue. But those are gas tanks. They have finite amount of storage that they can store. Okay? And so you get up in the morning, you have a bowl of oatmeal. Good nutrition. Nobody can argue oatmeal is good nutrition. It'll sabotage weight loss every time because it's all carbohydrate. You get up in the morning, your gas tanks are full. They've filled up overnight. So your glycogen storage in your muscle and in your liver is full. So you eat carbs for breakfast, where can it go? You can burn it if you're actively exercising. Most people don't do that when they first get up. Or it can be stored as fat. And our ability to store carbohydrate in fat is unlimited. Our ability to store carbohydrate as glycogen in the liver and in the muscle is limited. You can, it depends on the individual and your physical size, but it's probably between 100 and 250 grams of carbohydrate in each. And when you get up in the morning, you're already full. So there's only one place you can go. That banana on your oatmeal will sabotage you every time. Good nutrition, but it'll sabotage you. So this is taken from Jason Fung's study. Jason Fung is a Canadian nephrologist that specializes in treating diabetics and getting them off of their insulin. Does amazing jobs. He's done some really neat stuff on intermittent fasting. But excess carb leads to increased insulin, which leads to fatty liver, which leads to more insulin resistance, which leads to more insulin secretion, which just circles. Excess carb leads to increased insulin, which leads to fatty liver, which leads to fatty pancreas, which leads to beta cell dysfunction, which leads to the cells don't make the right kind of insulin anymore, and the blood sugars go up even further. So what do we treat it with? We treat it with nutrition. Understand there is a difference between good nutrition and the nutrition necessary to treat insulin resistance. Dietitians will tell you over and over again, if you eat good nutrition, things will work out just fine. If you're not insulin resistant, that's absolutely true. If you are insulin resistant, it won't work. 2/3 of our population is insulin resistant. It won't work. So there is a difference between good nutrition and some of the foods I tell patients to eat and some of the foods I tell patients to avoid are perfectly good nutrition, but they'll sabotage you because of their carbohydrate content. So there's a difference between good nutrition and weight loss nutrition in correcting insulin resistance. Foods made up of protein, fat, carbohydrates, and sometimes in some of the carb there's some fiber. So let's talk about that. What happens when you eat a high carb diet? What happens when you eat a high carb diet? Let's pick a number. Let's say you require 2,000 calories to get through your day. So you eat 2,000 calories today. But you start your day out with that bowl of oatmeal with a cup of raisins on it. That's the equivalent of 100 grams of carb. That drives up your blood sugar, which drives up insulin. That insulin then takes 500 of those calories and shoves them into fat storage. Well, that sucks. Your weight gain's going up, okay? But it took 500 calories away from you. So now you're trying to get through your day on 1,500 calories, which is called starvation. It makes you want to eat more, and it makes you hungry. And the second thing that it does is it takes 500 calories out of your gas tank. So now you run out of gas faster. And so your energy levels are low, you're hungry. You go see the doctor or your healthcare provider, they say you need to eat less and exercise more, and I argue you can't do it. Because if you're eating a high-carb diet, you're hungry all the time, and you're too tired to work out. You can't. But if we take the carbs away from you and replace it with fat, a bunch of good things happen. The inflammation drops, your appetite drops, your energy improves, and it takes about 5 days. So that's what we want to do. Decreases inflammation, and it just solves the problem. Let me back up. I think nope, I got it. So, traditional thinking is that it's all about calories. And it's not about calories. It's not about calories. It's about what we do with those calories. And so when you're insulin resistant, traditional treatment is, let's give you more medicine. Let's give you more insulin. Let's put you on a low-fat diet. And we're making patients worse. But if we do the other things that we know that do work, fasting, you don't eat, low-carb, high-fat diet, bariatric surgery, those are all things that do work, okay, and allow us to take patients off of insulin and get them off of their medications. So we're basically, this is a hormonal disease. We're trying to control appetite and we're trying to control nutrition, and we're fighting hormones. And then what happens if you put a 16-year-old boy and a 16-year-old girl in a room together and tell them not to look at each other? That ain't going to work. Okay? And it's the same thing when you eat carbs. You'd stimulate the hormones that drive the eating behavior. Just a second, I want to talk just a minute about epigenetic transmission of this disease. Because everybody knows that diabetes can be inherited genetically. If your parents had diabetes, your risk of diabetes is increased. We know that insulin resistance is aggravated by crappy nutrition. But there's a concept called epigenetics, which has to do with the milieu of the baby when it's in the uterus, even preconception, with insulin-resistant parents that are not transferring genetic material, but they still transfer the insulin resistance to that child. So we need to address this problem with our young women and young men before they conceive if we've got any hope of breaking this epidemic. Because the transmission of it doesn't have to be genetic. It occurs because of the environment in the uterus as well. Let's talk a little bit about stress. Everybody says, I'm stressed. Stress eating. What happens with stress? It does some things to you. It raises your serum cortisol level. Chronic stress raises cortisol. So when you raise your cortisol level to deal with stress, that raises your blood sugar. That rise in blood sugar raises insulin. That rise in insulin takes calories and shoves them into fat storage, makes your weight go up. So stress eating is really a hormonal problem. It's not just a weakness, I can't deal with the stress. Now, there's ways we like patients to deal with stress. The best way to deal with stress is to get a little piece of exercise when you feel stressed. Helps you deal with it. It doesn't make it go away, but it helps you deal with it. But stress eating is real. It raises your blood sugar. And just a quick story. Tuesday morning, I woke up in the morning. Couldn't walk. I had a vestibular neuritis. Never had anything like this before. I couldn't walk, my balance was off. It affects your balance organ in your ear. So I called one of my colleagues at work and I told him what was going on, and he prescribed some high-dose steroids for me to take to make it go away. And fortunately it did. I'm here today. I feel pretty good. But the high-dose steroids did some things to me that I didn't like. That night I was much better. But I couldn't get my mind off of ice cream. And I haven't had ice cream in months, and I couldn't get my mind off of ice cream. It was weird. So, stress, cortisol, they play a role. So, what are we doing wrong? We're eating processed foods. We eat food with too many ingredients. We eat too fast. We want too much quick and easy. I hear that every day. Doc, I just want something quick and easy. Well, the weight didn't come on quick and easy. It came on slow and steady. And so we need to approach it that way. And we want people to eat real food. We want people to eat food that their grandmother knows what it looks like. Don't eat food that your grandma doesn't recognize. Okay? We want to stay away from the preservatives, the sugars, and there's sugar in everything. All of the packaged foods are full of bad fat. All of the packaged foods are full of hidden sugars. So that if there's something in that food label, when you look at food labels that ends in OSE, that's sugar. So we need to make changes. We need to eat real food, and we got a public health problem. Now, I just got to confess to you, I'm a bleeding heart conservative, okay? I don't like too much government intervention. But we've got a place here where we need to be putting labels on foods. And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, prenatally, women need to be, and their spouses, their baby's fathers, need to be educated that sugar is a poison. If you think about sugar, sugar is not a natural part of our diet. As we, as a species, came through the ages, we would eat a little sugar. Some brave guy would knock a beehive out of a tree and we'd get some honey, but that wasn't very much. Sugar came into our life when they started raising sugarcane in the Caribbean back in the 1600s, and now it's everywhere. So sugar's a poison, and we need to have labels on our food that identify it as such, just like alcohol, just like nicotine, just like all the other things that we warn pregnant women about, to keep their babies from becoming insulin resistant. So the cost of metabolic syndrome is huge. The global costs are huge. I think that my Social Security is intact. Low-carb, high-fat diets don't stimulate insulin. Ketosis is where we want you to be. Ketosis, the definition of ketosis is fat burning. You can achieve ketosis two different ways. Ketosis is burning fat. How can you get rid of the fat if you don't burn it? You have to. So you can achieve ketosis through starvation, eating a very low-calorie diet. That's not sustainable. They've tried that many, many times, telling patients they can only eat 500, 600 calories a day. That's what happens with bariatric surgery. They make your stomach basically the size of a hen's egg, and so you basically starve yourself. It solves the metabolic problems. I've already mentioned that. It'll solve the metabolic problems, but it's not sustainable, and I see their failures all the time. So you can achieve ketosis and burn fat by not eating very much, or you can achieve ketosis by eating a low-carbohydrate, high-fat diet. High-fat diet. And it works just fine. You stay in ketosis and you're able to burn those calories rather than store them because there's no insulin. The insulin levels are low. Fiber is good. The more fiber, the better. Fiber helps delay the absorption of the fat into the lower part of the gut, where those long-chain fatty acids can then be broken down into medium-chain fatty acids, which are really, really good for your lipids, for your cholesterol. That's why we see patients with improvement. You already heard one anecdote of the improvement in lipids that you can get. I'll just tell you about me. Back in the 70s, I was a med student at the University of Minnesota when the first cholesterol studies were being done. And I was a guinea pig. I was a med student. They drew our blood like crazy. And so I knew what my numbers looked like back then, and they were horrendous. They were terrible. And now my triglycerides are, I think they're 50, 52, and my HDL cholesterol is 96. I mean, it's incredible what you can do with nutrition. So, dietary fat is good for you as long as it's good fat. So let's talk about good fat. Good fat is natural fat. Think of good fat as being the fat that God put on the earth in the first place. Butter comes from cows. Margarine comes from some chemist. I don't know. Who do you trust? Bacon, grease, and lard come from pigs. That's natural. The fat that's in eggs, the fat that's in dairy products like sour cream, cream cheese, regular cheese, no carb, lots of good fat. The fat that's in nuts and seeds and avocados, they're amazing. The fat that's in fish and seafoods, olives, olive oil, coconut oil. They simply take them and they compress them. They squeeze the oil out of them. That's a real, natural, good food. On the other hand, the vegetable oils, the processed oils, corn oil, mazola oil, canola oil, soybean oil are processed at close to 1,000 degrees. That's not so natural. And that introduces a bunch of oxidative end products that I don't think are very good for you. So, fat, de novo lipogenesis, the production of fat from the food that we eat, doesn't come from eating fat. It comes from eating carbohydrates. Driven by insulin, raising VLDL and apolipoprotein B, we're going to talk about those, and the different kinds of cholesterol and how that affects you. okay? So cholesterol, when you look at your cholesterol number, the cholesterol itself, that number doesn't mean anything. What's important are the triglycerides, the HDL cholesterol, the ratio between the two, which we'll talk about in a minute, and everybody knows about LDL cholesterol. LDL cholesterol is the so-called bad cholesterol. Well, maybe, okay? When they measure LDL cholesterol, they're measuring the total LDL cholesterol. Well, if you look at mine, my LDL cholesterol is like 160 or something like that, which I should be on a statin for sure, okay? That's the last thing in the world I'll take. Because LDL cholesterol is made up of different pieces. There's LDL-A, apolipoprotein A, apolipoprotein B, and variants in between. Well, LDL-B, apolipoprotein B, is indeed atherogenic. That'll cause heart disease. But apolipoprotein A protects you. And so when you measure the total, you don't know how much of each you've got. I do, because I have mine measured. And so the total LDL cholesterol, if you don't fractionate it, you don't know what you've really got. And we know that by eating a high-fat, low-carbohydrate diet, you will raise your apolipoprotein A, cardioprotective. And eating that diet will lower your triglycerides, which are what really drive the LDL-B, which is bad. So we look for, I think I've got it written in here, a triglyceride to HDL ratio of 2 to 1 or less. That's my index as to metabolic health. We want that LDL, or we want the HDL low, or as high as you can get it, and the triglycerides low. So my triglycerides are 50-something, my HDL is 90-something, so it's almost 0.6, 0.5. Okay, that's where we want. Anything under 2 is acceptable. Everybody, traditional thinking is that exercise raises your HDL cholesterol. Exercise doesn't increase your HDL cholesterol. Exercise improves insulin sensitivity. That allows your HDL cholesterol to go up. It's not the exercise. Take a minute and talk about thyroid function. One of the things that happens in some patients, is that they hit plateaus. Thyroid hormone is the driver. It's sort of the thermostat for our bodies, and it controls how we burn energy. You know, the macronutrients, the protein, the carbs, the fat, are critical. But thyroid function does play a role. And sometimes what happens is we end up, after losing a bunch of weight, we end up going into hibernation. Your body says, whoa, you're losing way too much weight. You're losing way too much weight. We need you to slow down. And so thyroid hormone, when your thyroid is low, you might be cold, constipated, low energy levels, dry skin, feel crappy, no energy. So thyroid hormone is made up of a molecule that's got 4 iodine molecules attached to it. I don't want to confuse anybody, but I want the healthcare providers here to understand this a little bit. What happens is that T4, 4 iodine on it, it's pretty inactive, doesn't do anything. But then the thyroid takes one of the iodines off and converts it to T3, which is the driver of our metabolism. Sometimes what happens is that it will take that iodine off of the wrong spot. And that's what happens when animals go into hibernation. And it puts you into hibernation too. And so your energy levels fall, and it requires a unique means of treating it. And we have patients once in a while that we have to treat them with thyroid replacement in different ways. So thyroid plays a role here, and I just wanted to mention that. So we always look at thyroid function and look at that. And for the healthcare providers here, you know, the reverse T3 is a test that I do pretty often. What about ketosis? We mentioned it. Ketosis is fat burning. Okay, so everybody worries about ketosis. You know, the Atkins diet is a ketogenic diet. I see patients all the time that have been, I'll ask them, what did you do for weight loss when you were, 20 years ago? Well, I did Atkins. How'd you feel? I felt great. Did you lose any weight? Oh, a ton. Why'd you quit it? Oh, it wasn't healthy. It wasn't healthy. Okay, so it puts you into ketosis. Everybody worries about ketoacidosis, which is a disease that type 1 diabetics can get and is life-threatening, and it's dangerous. But it requires a keto level that is much, much, much higher than you can get with a ketogenic diet that we prescribe for patients to eat. Ketoacidosis can only occur in the absence of insulin. It is virtually impossible for my patients to become ketoacidotic because they make too much insulin. They can't get there. But they can become ketotic, and that's what allows them to lose weight. So don't let anybody tell you that ketosis is not safe. It is. I'm in ketosis right now. My mind works real clear if I'm burning ketones. My brain works way better. Exercise. Exercise is always good, okay? The keys to weight loss are good nutrition, the right nutrition for you, which generally is going to be low carb, high fat in 95% of my patients, and a little piece of exercise most days. That exercise is important, not because it burns calories. Everybody thinks exercise is about burning calories. Exercise is about improving insulin sensitivity at the cellular level. Your cells will then respond to insulin more efficiently. You downregulate how much insulin you're producing. Less insulin translates into easier weight loss. So it isn't about the calories that you burn. It's about lowering the insulin levels, and that's what exercise does. You got to get the idea. Calories is not what it's all about. What's the best exercise? We had a support group that we ran in Ely. Question always came up, what's the best exercise, Doc? Walking, right? Everybody says walking. No. Best exercise is the one you keep doing. So, it's whatever you can do to stay active and keep doing. Okay? I'm an old canoe racer. I paddle canoes in the summertime, I cross-country ski in the wintertime, and I lift weights. Strength training, it turns out, is really, really, really important. We're learning more and more about exercise with strength training and how it can do some amazing things to your body in terms of preserving it, helping your chromosomes heal and delaying the aging process. So a couple of sessions with some strength training a week, even if it's only for 15 or 20 minutes, pays huge dividends. I want you to be aware of your medications. Medications play a huge role. We use appetite-controlling medications. We use metabolic medications to treat patients. But the worst problem is the medications that we prescribe that cause patients to gain weight, and there are lots of them, especially the diabetic medications. We've been spending time the last 45 minutes talking about insulin. What happens when your blood sugars are high? The doctor will give you more insulin. That's making you worse. It's not making you better. And a bunch of the other drivers of insulin release are meds that we use to treat diabetes as well. But there are some that actually lower the insulin levels and make you better. And so you need to have those kinds of discussions with your physician. The antidepressants, the antipsychotics, birth control pills, steroids, I already told you, make me want to eat ice cream. All of those different meds will drive up your appetite. They increase insulin resistance, making you less insulin sensitive, making you want to gain weight. Less carb equals less insulin equals easier, faster weight loss. So, what do I eat? Okay? Let's look at carbs. Avoid the white stuff. White bread, white rice, white flour, white noodles, white potatoes, all the white stuff. So, you think you're smart. I'm going to buy that 15-grain bread. It's got all the nuts and sticks and twigs and crap in it. So, a slice of white bread has got 20 grams of carb. It's got 1 fiber. We allow patients to subtract the fiber, so it's got 19 net carbs. So the 15-grain bread has got 19 carbs, 2 fiber, net carb is 17. You haven't made any difference. So I have patients eat, if they're going to eat bread at all, we want them to eat the low-carb stuff. And if you look at labels, you can find it. I eat low-carb wraps, low-carb pita, low-carb flatbread, low-carb tortillas all the time. Avoid sugar. I don't care if it's white sugar, brown sugar, maple sugar, molasses, honey, agave, nectar, high fructose corn syrup, it's all the same stuff. Vegetables that grow underground. So the veggies that grow in the soil store starch. God's protecting their energy storage by putting them in the dirt and keeping the animals from eating them. So, potatoes, sweet potatoes, yams, beets, carrots, parsnips, turnips, rutabaga. You know those baby carrots? Everybody eats those baby carrots. They've been modified so they have more sugar in them. And it's a marketing ploy, so you'll buy them. Over in this part of the world, it's farm country. Okay, what do they do with beets? They turn them into sugar. And the last one on the list is corn. That's what they feed cattle and hogs in the feedlots, and they do that on purpose. Okay? So, avoid those things, and fruit is wonderful nutrition. But if you're insulin resistant, fruit will sabotage you. The best fruits are going to be the blueberries, strawberries, raspberries, blackberries, all the berries, and the way I like to eat them is with whipping cream. Okay? Because there's, if you look at a glass of milk, 8 ounces of milk has got 12 carbs. 8 ounces of cream has got 4. The big difference. So, what carbs should I eat? What carbs should I eat? The more fiber, the better, because if you remember, I said we allow you to subtract the fiber. I like my patients to limit their carbohydrates to about 50 grams per day. The less, I eat about 20 or 25 grams of carb on any typical day. The less carb, the easier the weight comes on. So, the vegetables that grow above the ground are much better. All of the leaf vegetables, lettuce, spinach, cabbage, kale, broccoli, cauliflower, asparagus, bell peppers, tomatoes, squash, zucchini, cucumbers, eggplant, Brussels sprouts, celery, it all grows above the ground. That stuff is safe. It's all low carb. Avocados. An avocado's got 17 grams of carb. It's got 14 grams of fiber, and it's full of good fat, so its net carb is 3. So if you like guacamole, eat it. But you need to take the low carb wraps, crisp those up instead of the regular chips. So the above ground vegetables are safe, mushrooms are safe, olives, black olives, green olives don't have any carbohydrates. You can eat the whole jar. And one of the beautiful things about a low carb, high fat diet is all of a sudden salt and sodium become a non-issue. We oftentimes have to get patients to eat more salt because their blood pressures fall too much. And finally, onions and garlic are okay also. Onions grow below the ground, but if you think about an onion, the bulb of the onion is really the bottom of the leaf, and that little fuzzy thing under the bulb is really what the root is, and so onions are good. So this is what it looks like. High fat, good protein, no carbs. This is a reference. You guys can go, anybody can go to obesitymedicine.org. Obesitymedicine, one word, .org. And for the healthcare providers that are here, this is a tremendous resource for learning more. Okay, it's about 130, 140 page PDF that has got just tons of good information on it. If anybody can go to it and look at it and get it. And they have now come up with a pediatric obesity algorithm and put out the Obesity Medicine Association. All this stuff is free. Just tremendous resources. And here's some other references on there too. Okay, there's a ton of stuff on the line. Go to a website called dietdoctor.com. It's put out by a guy named Andreas Enfeldt, who is a Swedish family doctor, does nothing but obesity management. But he's got links on there to tons of stuff. Dietdoctor.com. Okay, am I out of time there, Zach?
Yes.
Get the time in. My understanding is that there's going to be time for questions afterwards, so we'll do that.
Yeah, we'll have a Q&A time at the end. Yeah, that was great. There will be a test, so make sure you have all of this information down. Remember on your Q&A sheets as you listen to these talks, if you have a question that's not addressed today when it comes time for our lunch, go ahead and write it down. We're going to have a Q&A session at the very end. So we're going to go ahead and bump our schedule out a little bit with the late start.